the party of the center, and the march into prohibition. Anyone who wants to know what political wear and tear in its purest form looks like only needs to observe how a clear no suddenly becomes an enthusiastic maybe, and, in the end, a loud yes as soon as budget pressure increases. The story is as simple as it is revealing. And at the party conference, it's decided with a serious expression that the party stands in the center, has principles, sets boundaries, and doesn't want to boss citizens around. As soon as the spotlight dims, the same personnel reappear with an old pet project, spruced up, repainted as if nothing had ever happened. This is precisely where the real scandal begins, not with attacks, but with broken promises as a governing style. First, it was called a sugar tax. No, thank you. Too deep an intervention in daily life, questionable benefits, the wrong signal. That was public, official, internally agreed upon by the party, and sold as a policy. Anyone who still believed that a party conference resolution carried weight was soon to experience how quickly political certainties evaporate when new budget holes appear, and coalition arithmetic calls for fresh money. Suddenly, the same proposal no longer sounds like paternalism, but like care, prevention, and responsibility for children. The fact that the justification completely changes direction along the way no longer seems to bother anyone in Berlin. The trick is always the same. Take a morally charged term, preferably health or child protection, and attach a fiscal policy measure to it. Afterward, access to your wallet is sold as an educational benefit. The Treasury becomes a classroom, the tax assessment an educational measure, and self-reliant citizens become objects of state control. Those who object are considered heartless. Those who question effectiveness are considered old-fashioned, and anyone who points out that the state shouldn't be father, mother, and cafeteria all at once is treated as if they have personally insulted the public good. Particularly revealing in this context is the choreography between the party and the media. First, a debate is framed for days as courageous and necessary. Then the same old explanations follow. Less sugar, better health, smarter consumer choices. Sounds reasonable until you do a simple reality check. There have long been sugar-free options on practically every shelf. There are light, zero, water, tea, everything available. The market has been responding to demand for years. So the problem isn't that there's no choice. The problem is that political actors cannot tolerate freedom of choice unless it has been pre-formatted by the state. And yes, the number games are routinely supplied. So many grams per capita here, recommended amount there, plus the promised sum from the new levy. 450 million euros are supposed to simultaneously support the coffers and finance prevention. This dual use is the real joke. Either the measure works strongly, in which case consumption decreases and the revenue base shrinks, or the measure works weakly, in which case consumption remains high and the state enjoys stable additional revenue. In both cases, the measure is sold as a success. Anyone who seriously claims it's about children's health should at least honestly say what comes next. First alcohol, then tobacco, then sugar, then the next product group, always with the same script. Today it's lemonade, tomorrow meat, the day after tomorrow a new surcharge model for everything that can be labeled as unreasonable. The framework remains the same, a small moral justification on the front, a fiscal purpose embedded in the back. One doesn't have to be a prophet to see where this leads, into a daily life where the state no longer sets rules, but evaluates and prices lifestyles. This is precisely why the criticism doesn't just target the idea of a sugar tax, but the political culture behind it. A party that, on paper, opposes paternalism and, in the next beat, adopts the same mechanism, doesn't just lose a detailed issue, it loses its reliability. And reliability in a democracy is not a luxury. It is the currency with which trust is paid. If resolutions are only valid until the next press conference, if rejections only last until the next budget round, then all that remains of the grand claim of the center is ultimately PR foam. The particularly bitter part lies with its own base. Members stand at party conferences, wave cards, applaud resolutions, listen to Sunday speeches about freedom and moderation, and then shortly thereafter witness how the leadership retracts everything if needed. What does the voter learn from this? That the program is optional, that promises are situational, that in the end you get whatever fits the power play anyway? Let's look at the core argument of the proponents. Higher prices are supposed to change behavior. That sounds neat in a textbook, but in practice, it regularly fails with people who are not model figures. With tobacco, prices have been raised for years. People still smoke. It's similar with other luxury foods. Consumption doesn't just disappear because a ministry tightens the price screw. It shifts, is compensated, is maintained despite everything. And in the end, the burden disproportionately affects those who already have to budget tightly. Precisely those people for whom everyday life is already expensive enough without political education taxes. The next argument, then, is industry will be forced to change recipes. This, too, is presented as if it were a revolutionary intervention. In reality, the industry has long responded to different preferences: sugary, reduced sugar, sugar-free. Everything exists in parallel because parallel demand exists. Those who want less sugar can already choose it today. Those who consciously want to choose something else can also do so. This plurality is not a policy failure, but an expression of adult consumer choice. To reinterpret it retrospectively as a market failure is just a pretext to sell state control as progress. Added to this is the rhetorical shift that must not be overlooked. As soon as the project fails within the party itself, it's called reasonable skepticism, intervention too far-reaching, unclear success. As soon as pressure from the coalition and budget increases, it's called a necessary step, courageous prevention, social responsibility. The same subject, two opposing narratives depending on the political climate. This isn't development through new insights. It's opportunism with a press release. And that's exactly where the opposition line runs. On one side are citizens who want to make decisions for themselves, including wrong decisions, because that too is part of freedom. On the other side stands a growing block of functionaries, moral activism, and media accompaniment that wants to turn every everyday question into a control project. This block has no problem governing into ever smaller areas of life, as long as the label sounds caring enough. They call it modern. In truth, it's the old desire for top-down governance, just with friendlier buzzwords. The public debate is deliberately narrowed in the process. Anyone who argues against new levies is made to appear as if they want to deny health problems. That's cheap but effective because, of course, there's obesity. Of course, there's misconduct. Of course, there are families who need support. The only question is whether the answer to that really always has to be a new tax that ultimately ends up in the general financial cycle. Experience shows that a significant portion of such additional revenues disappear into the very holes that were already there before. That's not an insinuation. That's political reality. Anyone who wants to help children can start with education, sports programs, practical enlightenment, parental involvement, and municipal infrastructure. That's laborious, not spectacular, and doesn't generate quick headlines. That's precisely why it's unattractive for politicians who want to simulate immediate impact. A levy can be announced in a press conference. Behavioral change through long-term work cannot be staged. It can only be achieved. And at this point, symbolic politics separates from true responsibility. For the CDU, this whole issue is therefore more than a sideshow. It is a litmus test for their own claim. Anyone who presents themselves as a bourgeois force cannot, on a daily basis, oscillate between rhetoric of freedom and a yearning for prohibition without eventually becoming incredible. Anyone who promises stability to their voters must not treat resolutions like disposable goods. Yes, anyone who claims to be the center must first show that their own word remains in the center and does not swing left or right at every opportunity, depending on where applause or money beckons. In the end, it's about something very simple. Politics is allowed to name problems. Yes, politics is allowed to set frameworks, clearly. But politics must not treat citizens like a perpetually in need of education project that can only be kept on course by price penalties. Precisely this attitude erodes trust, piece by piece. Today with soft drinks, tomorrow with the next everyday product, the day after tomorrow with the next morally packaged levy. And each time, they say this time, it's really just well-intentioned. Citizens are now seeing the pattern. First, the grand announcement of principles, then the quick capitulation, then the condescending explanation of why the capitulation was actually leadership. A brief interjection, and it's important. If you believe the state will protect you in the next crisis, then look around. The truth is, you're alone, and if you don't have a plan, you'll be overrun. That's precisely why we developed the Crisis Preparedness System, my complete step-by-step course with which you protect your money, your freedom, and your life before it's too late. The link is in the description. And honestly, anyone who doesn't check this in 2026 is making one of the biggest mistakes of their life. Anyone who governs this way might get headlines in the short term and revenue in the medium term, but in the long term, they'll face a bill that no tax in the world can settle: the loss of credibility. That's precisely why the debate about sugar is far more than a debate about taste. It is a debate about whether political promises are still worth something, whether freedom in everyday life only applies with reservations, and whether a centrist party wants to be more than just a label on a can. If you're fed up with this political zigzag, share this video.